Hey everybody, let's talk about avoidance. Wait, where are you going? Come back! If you turn this video off, I'm going to assume that you're avoiding it. I wanted to talk about the different types of avoidance and the different ways that we use the word avoidant, because avoidance is one of those psychological terms, like a lot of terms in psychology, where I don't know if it evolved over time or different people just decided to use it different ways, but it doesn't mean the same thing depending on the context you're using it in. So it gets confusing very easily when you hear it being used in different ways by different people for different reasons. Before I get into some of the different uses for the term avoidant and maybe some examples, I want to say that when we think of avoidance, or we specifically think that somebody is avoiding something, it sounds like they're doing it intentionally. Like, we want to place responsibility on them and say, well, you're avoiding it. Why are you avoiding it? But that's not always how avoidance works. Sometimes people avoid things without even realizing that they're avoiding them. They don't see the behavior as avoidant, and it can be hard to convince somebody that they're avoiding something for this reason, because to them, the things that you're seeing as avoidant and what they're actually doing, there's no connection between the two. Even though there could be, they're just not understanding the connection. So what I'm getting at here is that it's really easy to judge somebody for avoiding things or for being an avoidant person, but they may not even realize that they're doing this. So how much can we judge them for something they don't even realize they're doing? I don't think that's fair. Alright, so there are two primary ways that I know of the word avoidant being used when it comes to mental health and psychology and psychological disorders and all this stuff. So the primary way, the big way that I think of, is with avoidant personality disorder. Now, avoidant personality disorder, maybe not the best choice of words for labeling this disorder, like a lot of the personality disorders. So basically what it is, and I'm summarizing here, you can go to a therapist if you want to find out if this is what you or somebody else has. Generally, the idea is that somebody with avoidant personality disorder, they feel criticized, they feel a low self-esteem, and when they're around other people in social situations, it's very uncomfortable. Now, they may be driven to avoid a lot of those situations, but they may also not avoid those situations and just deal with being uncomfortable. It's not the same as social anxiety with the personality disorder. It's a little bit more intense. It really interrupts their lives very strongly. Social anxiety disorder, we typically think of it as, having a hard time being around people. Avoidant personality disorder, it's crippling. It guides their life, basically. The thing to understand here is that, yes, although they are avoiding social situations and they're avoiding being around people, what they're really avoiding is that perceived criticism that other people have of them, or that feeling of inadequacy, or the thoughts going through their brain telling them that they're not good enough, that people are criticizing them, that they're going to be judged. It's all that fear is what they're really avoiding. They're not, although they may be actually avoiding people, what they're really avoiding is that criticism, because they have this feeling of low self-esteem and they just can't take it. And then the other context that I usually think of when I hear avoidance is with an avoidant attachment. And there are two styles of attachment that are avoidant. There is dismissive-avoidant and fearful-avoidant. Dismissive-avoidant is when you don't feel comfortable in intimate situations, your typical style of bonding with somebody, like in a romantic relationship, but also in other ways of bonding with people, maybe friendships, maybe getting close to a work partner or something. I don't know. Relationships are weird. But when you get close to somebody, you get intimate, when you move closer and share some vulnerability, somebody who's dismissive avoidant, they don't want to feel that. That's very uncomfortable for them. So they tend to keep people at a distance. And in that way, they don't necessarily avoid people, but they avoid the feeling of intimacy. They avoid being vulnerable, and they may dismiss you and your emotions and things because, again, that level of relating to somebody is uncomfortable for them. So it's not that they're avoiding people. It's not even necessarily that they're avoiding relationships. They're just avoiding that intimacy. And then you have fearful-avoidant, which is still the same as dismissive-avoidant, but you have a component where sometimes they're doing that, but other times they're really anxious and they move more towards the anxious, preoccupied side of attachment style. So they start to really want somebody around a lot and they feel insecure by themselves. And in that case, you could kind of think of it like they're avoiding being alone, but it's just like a push and a pull. Sometimes they really want people around. Sometimes they feel insecure and inadequate and they want to express themselves. And other times they're like, you're too close. This is scary. Get away from me. And it's the back and forth, and that's what makes it fearful. And this can look like a lot of different things. It can look like being over involved in hobbies because you're trying to stay away from your spouse. Or it could look like maybe, I don't know, always doing a lot of activities where there's not a lot of talking involved, like maybe watching TV together all the time so that you can focus on the TV and you don't have to have those discussions that you don't want to have just with your partner. Or it could just be trying to spend a lot of time alone or needing your own space and all that kind of stuff. And I probably should have given some examples for avoidant personality disorder. Avoidant personality disorder, maybe they just don't leave their house very often, or when there's a party, the answer is always no, I'm not going. Or maybe they specifically choose occupations where they don't have to be around people. What I want to point out here though, because again, avoidance is really context dependent and every person's a little bit different, is that a person doesn't have to be avoiding a particular person. They don't have to be avoiding people in general. They don't even have to be avoiding situations. It could be, and most likely the core of it is that they're actually avoiding thoughts or they're avoiding feelings. So it's not always that they're avoiding the thing that they're afraid of or gives them anxiety. It's that they're avoiding those internal feelings and things. So I think we need to keep the focus and perspective clear here that that's what's going on, because if we're trying to help somebody like this, then we have to know that it's not really about all these external things. It's about what's going on inside and how they relate to that. And I think it's also important to remember here that avoidance doesn't always look like avoidance. For example, somebody who's avoidant could just be somebody who it's like a workaholic. They're just always at work and always busy doing something. And that doesn't really look like avoidance at first because they're doing something, right? They're keeping busy and they're at work, so they're going out and doing something and they're probably among people. But it could be that they're at work because they don't want to, they're avoiding the home situation, they're avoiding their relationship. Or another example of somebody who might be avoidant in a relationship could be somebody who's always taking care of their partner, always making sure that they're, showered with gifts and they're cleaning the house and they're doing all the chores and they're doing all these things for their partner. But it's a lot of activity, but they're not having like the deep emotional conversations and connections with their partner because that's what they're avoiding, that intimacy components. So just remember that avoidance doesn't always look like avoidance. I think another time that we think about avoidance is when somebody's like a substance user or when they go out and party and they do all these kinds of things. And that's definitely true. Somebody can be avoidant in that way. But don't fall into the trap of thinking that it's about denial or something, because although that's true, some people may be in denial about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Other people may know that they're doing these things to try to cope. Just knowing that you're avoiding something doesn't really solve the problem, and pointing it out to somebody, well, that may be helpful to bring them some awareness of what's going on. Again, it's not just going to solve the problem, so don't expect that just because somebody gets that they're avoiding something that's enough. It's not enough. And the reason why it's not enough is because usually when we're talking about avoidance, behind that avoidance, as I mentioned, is some kind of feeling of anxiety or fear. And these are feelings in our bodies which get perpetuated by thoughts in our minds. Now, this anxiety and this fear, it could be based in reality. Perhaps they had an experience in the past or multiple experiences that weren't so good for them, that hurt, that were scary. And so their body picked up on that experience. It may not even be that it's their mind. Don't always think that they're in control here. It could be that their body just internalized those experiences and said, you know what? This isn't safe for you. So whenever they get near situations that remind them of that, the body reacts by saying, nope, you got to get away from this. And then they may not even be consciously aware of what they're doing. They just avoid things. And it could be that whatever they're afraid of, it could just be totally imagined. It could be that they have a feeling of anxiety, but then they work that feeling of anxiety up and their mind starts racing, and then they start layering all of these different scenarios that maybe aren't even playing out in reality, but they start freaking out and imagining them, and they're reacting to these imaginary scenarios, and now we're avoiding things that aren't even real. And then when we talk about something like this, you could maybe think of something like OCD, where somebody has a thought, and maybe it's an intrusive thought, a scary thought. Maybe there's a thought about religion and blasphemy, or maybe there's a sexual thought, or maybe there's a violent thought, and it freaks them out. And so now they're trying to avoid that thought, so they're trying to rationalize it away, or they're trying to think other things, and the thought keeps coming back. And again, I'm just trying to give you examples of how avoidance might show up. Sometimes we're not avoiding people and things, we're avoiding our thoughts, or we're avoiding our feelings. Usually it's one of those. It's happening within us. It's not so much about what's going on around us. Now, if you came here because you know somebody else who is avoiding things, there is something that you need to know. I want you to please listen to this. Pushing somebody to face the thing that they're avoiding is probably not going to be helpful. Most likely, you're going to do more damage if you try to push somebody into the thing that they're avoiding. And the reason for this is because they're avoiding it for a reason, probably because they don't have the coping skills necessary to be able to walk through that situation, to face that person, to be in those levels of intimacy with people, whatever it is. They're not able to cope. That's why they're avoiding. The avoidance is adaptive for them. It's fulfilling a function. And if you try to push somebody to face the thing that they're avoiding, you're just reinforcing the fear. You're making them experience the anxiety probably even more intensely, because now it's being done without their will, without them wanting to do it, without them walking into it comfortably. And all you're doing is making it worse. You're reinforcing to their body that this is a dangerous situation, this is bad. And now they also associate that feeling with you because you made them face it. And this is one of the many reasons why when we have these mental health issues, it's encouraged to go in and see a therapist, or you should encourage your friend or your family member, whoever it is, to go in and see somebody if you can, because you can be supportive. You can maybe help to teach them coping skills if they're open to that. But if they're not, these things get complicated. And again, forcing somebody into the situation just makes it worse and makes it harder for the therapist down the line to have to untangle this feeling that's got even more intense now. And while I'm on this, please remember that just because you have a way that you cope with things and works for you, or just because something that somebody's avoiding doesn't bother you, doesn't mean it's going to be the same for them. Everybody's a little bit different. Everybody has different life experiences. Everybody's body reacts differently to things. So it's not always appropriate to think like, well, it doesn't bother me, or I just do this, because it may not work for them. And relating to this idea of like not pushing people into doing things that they don't want to do or that are uncomfortable, not all avoidance is bad. Avoidance is a way of coping with things. If you're in a situation that is actually dangerous, where you should be afraid, where something is uncomfortable, avoidance is totally appropriate and normal, and we all do it. We should do it. That's our body's way of keeping us surviving and keeping us out of situations that could harm us. And in this way, all avoidance is really normal. It just gets out of whack sometimes, and this is where it becomes a problem, where we have trouble functioning in life, or it hurts our relationships with people. That's when avoidance really becomes a problem. So we don't want to pathologize avoidance in general and make it like people should never avoid things. It's normal and it's healthy to avoid things sometimes. It's not okay when it's a pattern and it's the way that we typically deal with situations or particular types of situations, or if it keeps us from relating to people in a healthy way and having a healthy life. Now, I know some people might debate me a little bit on this, and that's okay. I'm okay with having different opinions than other people, but I personally feel like there's going to be people out there who are like, well, I can avoid things. Like, I can live my life alone in the woods with a Wi-Fi connection, and I can work and never have to talk to anybody. And that's okay. That's how I cope with life. And I would say, yeah, you know what? That's probably okay to an extent, but at the same time, are you really coping with life? Because that's not typical life. So what happened if for some reason that situation that you're living in disappeared? would you be able to continue life? Would you have the skills to be able to start socializing with people again? Would you be able to get the job that you might need to continue? I'm not saying that you need to be able to adapt to every situation, but I just would say we should look at the situations we're in and at least question how close to the way most people live life in the culture that we are is. Because if we're living kind of a little bit out on an extreme, we may be able to cope, sure, and it may be a life that's comfortable for us. But in the long run, are we coping? Is it really healthy? That's up to you to decide, I guess. That would especially be up for a therapist to decide if it seems like it's becoming a problem. But to me, I think we need to question these things. I do know that the DSM says that it's only when something interferes with our life functioning that it becomes a problem. But I don't know. I kind of feel like humans are wired to be able to relate to other people and get things that we need from other people. And I know that we can get those things in roundabout ways. We're very adaptable people. Humans are very adaptable in general. But I can't help but feel like there's pieces of us missing when we adapt a little bit too much to a situation that removes us from other people. Okay, so what do you think about all of this? Did you ever think about avoidance in all these different ways before? Does it make sense to you? Do you have any questions? Let me know down below, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.